Sugarbush. My name's Darryl. And I get to share with you the legend of the discovery of maple sugar by the Indians, right? The first people that lived here. They were the ones that actually discovered that you could turn tree sap into syrup, into sugar. Now, it's hard for us to imagine what life must have been like if you were an Indian living here 400, 500, 600 years ago. That was very different than life is today. First of all, there was no Walmart, no Lowe's Supercenter, right? So anything that you had, I'm going to need that tree. It's part of my story. So sorry about that.
It's okay. I was just trying to make room for everybody else.
Yeah. Anyway, so anything that you had, you either made it yourself, you grew it, you traded somebody for it, or you just found it. It was just like the perfect thing. That's just what I was looking for, right? That was the only way that you had anything. And they lived in villages. The Lenape, the Indians that lived here, Lenape in their language just means people. So that's who they were. They were the Lenape. Of course, the Europeans that came called them Delaware Indians. Same group of people. They lived along the Delaware River. And they were one of the 7 tribes of the Iroquois nation. So they all shared this legend of the discovery of maple sugar. Now, they lived in communal structures called longhouses. Might be 4 families in one longhouse. So they weren't just hunter-gatherer barbarians. They had a society. They had a way of life. And you may all be familiar that the Indians had names for their full moons. Right? We all know the harvest moon and the hunter's moon, the strawberry moon. What do you think the name of the full moon in February was?
The Valentine moon.
That's March. No, February was the hungry moon. The hungry moon. I mean, winter time was hard. If you were an Indian, winter was hard. Now, they were farmers, and they grew 3 crops. And all of their tools were things they either made or they found. Now, they were good hunters, right? And if you were fortunate enough to get a deer, you would say a prayer over that animal, basically thanking that animal for giving its life to your family so you could survive. And they used everything. Nothing went to waste. So everything became tools, right? This would be good for getting the corn off the cob, or maybe if you had a hot date on a Saturday, comb your hair or something. But anyway, they didn't waste anything, they used it. And when they farmed, they would mound the earth, and in the center, they would plant corn on the center of the mound. And as the corn sprouted, around the corn, they planted their beans. And the beans want to grow on a vine, so the corn gave the beans something to grow on. And then around the base of the mounds, they planted their squash. And this grew in vines too, but that spread over the ground. So if you went with me for a walk through the woods 400 years ago and we came to a Lenape village, it did not look like something we would think of as a village. I mean, we plant how many of you guys have a vegetable garden? Right? Everything is segregated, right? It's got its own row, its own area. Tomatoes are over there. Don't let the cucumbers get in there, right? Well, if you saw a Lenape garden, it looked like a jungle. Everything grew on top of each other. And all of the houses then, the longhouses, would be on the inside of this structure. And so you could dry corn and beans and keep them for the winter, but by the time February came around, it was tough. But when March came, Maple Sugar Moon. It was one of the biggest family reunions you've ever seen. All of the villages would come together in a spot in the forest and they would make maple sugar. And one of the most important people in the village was the storyteller. No Netflix, right? No cable, no dish. Couldn't just pull out your smartphone and get the world at your fingertips, right? They had to entertain each other. And one of their favorite stories in March was the discovery of maple sugar and the story of Waxus. Waxus was a great chief, and he lived a long time ago. Now, one winter was the worst winter of all. We can all relate to this, The worst winter of all. I mean, February wasn't just a hungry moon. February was a starving moon. I mean, it was so bad. The people were complaining so loud that Waxus took to taking long walks away from the village. I mean, he just had to get away. And one day after coming back from his long walk, he went to the center of the village and he called all the people together and he told them, gather up all your things, everything you want to keep. We're moving. People were like dumbfounded. What? Never move a village in the middle of the winter? What, are you crazy? He was like, no, we have to move. Now, Waxus was a pretty smart man. He knew two things. He knew, number one, that if they stayed, some of them probably would starve. They would not survive this winter. So he had to take them where there was food. And the other thing he knew is he had to give these people a job. I mean a big job. Something so big it would take their mind off of their problems and how much they were suffering. And so the next morning when he got up, he led them out into the forest. Out into a place where during his daily walks he had noticed lots of signs of game. There were animals here, right? He could see turkey tracks in the snow, and he could see where the twigs had been nibbled by deer, and he could look up in the tops of the trees, and there were big bald nests of squirrels. So he led the people out into the forest, and he came to a spot, and he walked up to a tree with his tomahawk, and boom, buried that tomahawk in that tree. This marks the spot where we build our new village. Guess what? Waxus was right. In a couple of days, people were laughing and joking with each other. They were working so hard to get that new village built that they had totally forgotten about how miserable they were. So finally, when the village was taking shape, Waxus decided, yeah, I think tomorrow we'll go hunting. And on the morning of the hunt, he woke up and he noticed in the east some pretty color as the sun started to rise, and he took that as a sign. Yeah, it's going to be a good day. So he got all the men together in the morning and he walked over to the tree and he said, today we hunt. And he took his tomahawk out of the tree and off they went. Now, when the women got up, they had important jobs in the village to do. They had to take care of the children, and they were also responsible for tending the fires. Right? Now, if you were a Lenape, you didn't just whip out your Bic disposable, right? Pile up some leaves and there we go. Now, as a matter of fact, this here is my Lenape fire starter kit. This little tiny bow is not for hunting. This is for starting a fire with. And they had a board on the ground with a little notch in it, and in that notch they put the driest tinder, flakes of birch bark and dry grass and the little papery stuff you peel off the grapevines. And they put that on the ground, and they wrapped their bow like this, and then they started going like this. It's a good thing I wasn't a Lenape, my family froze. But you would go like this, and believe it or not, you do this long enough to generate enough friction, that stuff in there catches fire. It starts to smoke and it catches fire, and then they would pile more birch bark and grass and stuff, and before you know it, they had a nice fire going. And it was a fire very much like that. Those fires were not for heating. Right? It wasn't to keep everybody warm. That's not why you built a fire like this. No, they built this fire so they could cook with it. Right? It was a tool, something they could use. So Waxus's wife, when she got up, she tended the fire. And how they would keep the fire going is at night, before you go to sleep, you bank all the ashes up. You bury the fire, right? You bury the fire. So when you get up in the morning, you can just brush the ashes out of the way. You get the red hot embers out, and now you don't have to go through that. So she's working around the village, getting everything going, and she finally decides, I'm going to make a special stew for Waxus in honor of the first hunt in the new village. So they had some dried corn and beans left. She threw that in her cooking log. And when they first got there, remember those squirrel nests? She threw the squirrel meat in there, right? They got a couple of squirrels already. And she was ready to make her stew, but she needed water. So she thought, well, I'll gather up everything that holds water. I've got my pot, I've got my bowl. Where's my favorite wooden bowl? I had it here somewhere. Oh, that's right. I left it over there by the tree. The same tree that Waxus buried his tomahawk in. But something incredible was happening. In the morning when Waxus left, it was freezing cold. But while Mokwa was working around the village, the day had warmed up and now water was running out of the hole the tomahawk made, and it was dripping right in her bowl. At least it looks like water. It smells like it. She thanked the spirit of the tree for providing her water. Now she doesn't have to take the bowl to the creek. And she poured it in her cooking log, and she's all ready to cook. Cooking in a log. How do you think they did that? What do you think? You can't just pick it up and put it on the fire, can you? It's made of wood. No, so they couldn't put the cooking log in the fire. What they did was put rocks in the fire. So they put the rocks in the fire. The rocks get hot, and then they put them in their cooking log. So you can see, this is why they didn't want to make a giant bonfire.
Steve, get that rock.
Because you couldn't work in it if it was a giant bonfire. This is a fire for cooking
Steve.
with. And you get enough hot rocks in there, and believe it or not, it starts boiling. I think they ate some ashes. Ooh, that one is boiling. Look at that. Wow. So, and all day long, she's transferring rocks. She's taking some rocks out of the fire and putting them in the log, and taking old rocks out and putting them back in the fire. And while she's doing this, she starts to notice, something smells good. Wow, that smells really good. Meanwhile, the men are out hunting and just having a miserable time. Do you ever have one of those days? You know, you wake up in the morning and you're just like, oh, it's going to be a great day. But by the time you get home, you're like, where's the recliner? Right? So the men were out. They had a miserable time. And they're coming back to the village. And all of a sudden, they're like, as they get closer to the village, hey, you guys smell it? What is that? Wow, that smells great. And by the time they get there, they'll have a smile on their face. And when he gets to the longhouse, Moke was waiting for Waxus with a bowl, and she says, here, try this. And he's like, whoa, oh man, that is so good. Wow, what did you do? I've never had anything that's like sweeter than the ripest blueberry. What do you have? How'd you make it so sweet? She thinks for a second, all right. It's just got some squirrel meat and some beans and some corn. Oh, you know, I didn't go to the creek to get the water. I got it from the tree. So all day while she was making stew, what did she cook her stew in?
Syrup.
Maple syrup. She was making maple syrup. And that is the legend of how the Iroquois discovered that you can make sugar from tree sap. Now, if you were an Indian family, though, and you were out making maple syrup, you didn't use a little log like this. Oh, and you know what else you didn't do? You didn't make syrup. If you were a Lenape, they didn't even have horses, let alone cars. If you were an Eastern Woodland Indian, you walked everywhere you went. So if you were going to take something with you, you had to carry it, right? So they would cook it just like that with hot rocks until there was no water left. It was just sugar. And then they used it, they ate it on everything. And they could use it as currency. They could use it to barter with, to trade with. So, I hope you guys enjoyed learning the legend of the Iroquois.
Yeah.
And
That's why they call them the Sugar High Indians.
How the next group of people that
It's not good for diabetics, but
perfected the process. You're going to go right back the trail here towards the sugar shack and turn right and go to that next smoky fire down there. You haven't breathed enough smoke yet this morning, so you need to go down there where you can get the next smoky fire. And I want to thank you all for coming out.
Thank
today.
you.
Hey,
And
the
braving the cold.
Indians cause diabetes.
The Indians cause diabetes.
Yeah, well, you know, if you were a Lenape, you probably didn't reach our age anyway. Yeah. You know?
Yep.
I would have been like great-grandpa Lenape. Not that I may not already be great-grandpa American.
Thank you.